Hey there folks, we've had a very tough credit environment over the last 12 to 18 months. So today I've got my old mate here, Ben Kingsley, and we are going to talk to you about some concepts around finance, Ben, and some evergreen concepts to help people understand property finance in particular for property investors.
That's right, Mr. Holdaway. We are here to do a little bit of a dive in regards to understanding how to get money. Because you get money, you can put it to work, and when you put it to work, it makes more money for you.
It's all about leverage. So today we are going to show you a couple of things. Number one, we're going to talk about who are the players when it comes to borrowing money and who you need to know and understand the whole process. Secondly, we're going to talk about borrowing capacity and what is it that you need to know. There's actually 3 C's here, Ben, that we're actually going to talk about.
We'll talk about those 3 C's. What else we got, Bryce?
We are also going to have a quick chat about what sort of products are available. And then the last thing we'll have a quick chat about, Ben, is structure, ownership. What names can you buy in and what impact does that actually have?
The old strategy and structure stuff. Pretty important.
What does it matter if I buy it in my own name or in a structure? So that's pretty good. But Ben, the players, who are they? Let's start with that.
Well, the first thing is we need to get money, Bryce. So where do we get money from? Usually we get it from the lender or we get it from the mortgage broker. So that's where you're able to get that type of information. So when you're going to look for money, these are the people who supply the money, aren't they, Bryce?
They are. And it's important to understand, Ben, that if you go straight to the bank, they're going to give you the best product that they have.
Yes.
But if you go to a mortgage broker, they'll actually be able to go across different banks and hopefully tailor what you require with maybe that bank or that bank or that bank. So it means you've got a bit of diversity. But there's a couple of things to know here, Ben, isn't there?
Yes.
There is the savvy, or we call it the investment savvy mortgage broker.
Correct.
And then there is the transactor.
That's right.
And you want to really focus on the investment savvy, don't you?
Yeah, basically investment savvy mortgage broker is going to be able to understand a couple of things. Firstly, what sort of starting point you're in and where you're going to go with your money. So, you know, usually one property isn't going to necessarily give you the ability to retire from passive income from that one property. So there's probably going to be 2 or 3 in your portfolio over time. So the investment savvy broker is going to look at it as a game of chess. They're going to see what steps you need to make in the process. They're also going to look at the type of structure that you currently present to them. In a lot of cases, there may be a need to refinance and restructure that. So we separate non-deductible debt from deductible debt. And when we get those types of things out, we're then on a platform, a good foundation from which we can leverage into the future.
Yeah, because the investment savvy mortgage broker is doing a little bit of this, aren't they, Ben? They're sort of looking around the corner or having a look over the horizon to actually go, what's actually coming up as to what the decision I'm going to make now. Whereas the transactor, just get it done. Just get it done, doesn't matter, move on to the next one, move on to the next one. So it's really important.
Yeah, I think just also on that point, I think the other thing is that its borrowing power is so important, and these guys think about that because the old days, back in the day when you only potentially needed one lender and you'd do 3 or 4 properties with that one lender, is gone. So you might need to be your master structure with the one lender, lender A, but lender B could also be the one where you get maybe more servicing and greater borrowing power, and that's all part of the combination that you get today.
Very important. So we've got to talk about the lenders, Ben. We've also got the mortgage brokers, but the last thing to talk about is the lender's mortgage insurance. And essentially, if you're going to go greater than 80% loan to valuation ratio, Ben, you're going to have to be talking, or the bank will be talking to a lender's mortgage insurer to do that for you. So there's a couple of things for you to think about in the players. Now, Ben, the borrowing capacity. So the 3 C's, in fact, there's usually 5.
There is.
We're going to talk about 3 today. There's capacity.
Yep.
There's collateral.
Yep.
And there is character. So let's have a quick chat about those 3.
Well, first one is around the capacity. So what's your ability to be able to borrow that money and pay it back? That's a big part. So we talk about servicing assessments, servicing calculators, debt to service ratios. They're all sort of big fancy words, but it's basically looking at the capacity, your ability in terms of how you're able to pay that money back over time. Because remember, taking out debt is not necessarily for everyone, and you always want to make sure you're using debt for productivity outcomes, right? So good outcomes as opposed to bad debt, which is borrowing money for things that are material or don't deliver returns.
I like to think of that as the shovel, Ben, because the shovel is how much income do you got. The bigger the shovel, the more you can have the capacity to get that done. So
100%.
capacity. What about collateral?
Well, collateral also refers back to one of the other key players, which is the valuer, Bryce. So the valuer also plays an important role because collateral is the security. That is the thing, the house, the apartment, whatever it is that's going to be able to, that you're buying, that the bank's going to be happy with, because they want a bit of security. They want to make sure that that your asset, that security is worthy of lending against.
Income for capacity, equity for collateral.
Oh, that's a great word. A lot of people don't understand what equity is, Bryce.
Well, it's the
But
difference
it's the
between
difference.
Well, asset plus liabilities equals your equity. So there's the value of the house, there's the value of the loan, and whatever is the difference, the asset minus the loan is equal to your equity, isn't it?
That's right. So it's obviously, if you've got that debt, whatever that value is, you're minus that, and you've got that available to potentially borrow against. So that's a great analogy.
Now, character, Ben, this is kind of for the bank to determine, all right, so you might have income, you might have equity, but you might have moved homes every 5 minutes, or something to do with your character makes you stand out as a risk that the bank doesn't necessarily want to take on. So that gives you a little bit of a black mark, doesn't it?
Stability, Bryce, that's what they're looking for here. This is a long-term activity. We want to know how stable you are, basically. And to look at stability, we'll look at character. Oh, you've moved homes every 6 months for the last 5 years. Are you ready to settle down and take on a big mortgage and a big commitment? No, you're
What about
not.
moving jobs? What about moving interstate, overseas, all that sort of stuff?
Exactly.
So they want to have a look under the bonnet and see if you are actually a good risk, even though on paper you might stack up. So there's 3 of the 5 C's. A couple of things to think about with products, Ben, is you've got fixed versus variable.
Yep.
And that's important. You've got line of credit and you've got an offset account. They're 3 key things that we need to understand if you want to be investment savvy. And we talked about these things in our book, The Armchair Guide to Property Investing, How to Retire in 2000 a Week. But those are important things to understand when you're wanting to borrow money and understand what is right for you, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the most important thing when we're looking at variable loans is variable loans are effectively set by the banks. They fluctuate over time. There's a relationship usually with the cash rate set by the Reserve Government, and it's the margin between the cost of the money and what they're lending it is how the banks make their money. Now, that's different to where they source their fixed money, and that fixed money usually comes from 5-year, 10-year bond rates and those types of long-term money market pricing. And then ultimately, if they come down, they can offer more opportunistic fixed rates of 1, 2, 3, 5, in some cases even up to 10 years. So we're always saying, with fixed rate, it's always difficult if you are going to continue to build out your portfolio to lock in a fixed rate. But you can split, Bryce. So that is the most important thing that people need to understand. You can split those in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, you can. So you can have a bit as a fixed rate and a bit as a variable. So you can dive into that a little bit more too. Now, line of credit, Ben, that's like a big credit card. So essentially, we talked about equity back here.
Yep.
Imagine if you could release some equity and use it like a credit card. It's essentially what a line of credit is, but quite often the interest rate's a little bit higher. So it's important to understand there is a place when a line of credit could make sense, but you could also release some equity and then just put it into an offset account and actually have just a standard variable loan that might be cheaper while still having access to your funds. And if it's in a 100% offset account, which is essentially the money that's in the offset account is offsetting the interest that you're paying on the principal loan. So if you're able to do that, it might be a better way to structure your lending so that you can actually take advantage of a lower rate while still having liquidity so that you can access it for deposits and solicitors and costs and all those sorts of things. So there's a time and a place for those, but it's important to understand that for us, we think that an offset account is one of the key money management tools, let alone lending tools.
That's right, and I think the other big play that's happening today in the product space is the cost of money is also being sort of bucketed into principal and interest versus interest only. So you need to also understand that when you're investing, ideally the lower cost base you can get, the more assets you can potentially control. So we've obviously been a big fan over the journey of interest-only lending because you're in control of liquidity as opposed to principal and interest, which means that in a technical sense the loan is amortising over time. So there's a principal portion of the loan that you're paying out over the journey. So more can be said about this.
Heaps more could be said about
I
that.
think we're going to explore those in a future upcoming webinar.
We are, Ben, but what I want to quickly talk about is ownership over here. So you've got the opportunity to buy within your own name, or you could buy it within a structure. It could be a company or a trust.
Yep.
Or a lot of people are actually buying with a self-managed super fund. So understanding the options that are available to you within all of these structures, because in your own name you've generally got a lot of options, but as you tend to put structures into the mix, you'll find that the options start to diminish a little bit. But it's important to understand that you need a balance between protecting you. If you're in a highly litigious environment, you might want to put it into a structure, versus if you're not in a litigious structure and you need access to funds. So it's important that you understand what ownership you need, what's best for you from not only from your accountant will give you the advice from a tax perspective, but you also need to get some advice around, sure, you may have the best tax effective structure that's going around, but if you can't get the lending, Ben, on paper it's protecting you, but you can't do anything.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's talk of potential changes to lending in self-managed super funds and even banning it. So all of a sudden you think, I've set up a vehicle, but you can't borrow the money. If you're going in unit trusts or hybrid trusts or complex structures, you might think that's great because there's tax minimisation happening there. But the reality is, again, the banks mightn't like it. And they might charge you a premium for it. That's the other thing you also want to understand in terms of from the property side. So an example might be if you bought in a company, you don't get the 50% exemption on any profits that you make into the future. Land tax kicks in from $1. All of those things are all different variables. So there is both federal state taxes as well as state-based taxes that you need to be aware of depending on the different type of vehicle that you're investing in.
Now, folks, I think you'll agree, we've just gone through that really, really quickly, but there's a lot of different layers and a little bit of complexity that goes into just getting a loan to borrow money to buy an investment property.